everyone, and welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by Whoop. Start tracking your strain, recovery, and sleep scores with Whoop, and even get an extra month's membership and a free 4.0 strap when you sign up with the link in our description. If you like listening to us chat about CrossFit news and everything that's going on in the sport, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. On today's episode, we're breaking down the 4 workouts that CrossFit has programmed for the semifinals, 2 for the individuals, and 2 for the teams. Here to talk about them are sports analysts Brian Friend and Tommy Marquez. The anticipation is over. We finally know what the workouts are. Let's start taking a look with the individuals. Brian, what are your first initial thoughts when we look at the 2 workouts?
Yeah, so we have, 2, I would say, relatively short workouts here. I know that the event one says an 11-minute time cap, but I think that especially on the men's side, most won't need more than, hardly anyone will need more than 5 or 6 minutes. And then obviously, a lifting complex is going to be a short time domain, or there's probably the shortest time domain for the score that you end up registering, even though you might be on the floor for an extended period of time, letting everyone lift. So, we have probably 2 of maybe the 2 shortest workouts that we'll see in any of the, individual semifinals here that CrossFit is introducing, which does leave an opportunity for the other 4 workouts for a lot of creativity on the competition programmer or director's end.
Tommy, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, there's generally, once, just to kind of frame my thoughts and discussion here, when this first came out that CrossFit was going to program 2 of the test, there were a few things that came to mind as far as like how I wanted to wrap my head around it. One of them is pliability, which Brian touched on. So how well can these be moved and placed as chess pieces within the weekend to allow semifinal events to, be creative on their end and be able to have some freedom, as well as, knock a couple of the big checks off, out of the way. The other one is stimulus. So what is the intended stimulus? What are we looking at here for the actual test? And how does that play into the bigger picture as what they're trying to filter for the CrossFit Games? And the last one is storytelling, because there's an element of this that has become very pervasive from the time of the regionals, is that there are certain elements of regionals that are such high traffic areas. How well do these tests play into the storytelling on the broadcast, especially now that we're getting back to a place that we're going to have high quality broadcasts. We're going to have, live coverage pretty much wall to wall for a lot of these events. So do these events make for good storytelling as we start to, beef these athletes up? And I think there are elements of each of these that I really like and that fit within that framework.
Let's move on and quickly just take a look at the team semifinal 2 workouts. Initial thoughts, Brian, of these 2.
Yeah, so similarly to the individuals here, one of the workouts that is being mandated by CrossFit is a lifting event. However, where we had a front squat, clean, and jerk complex for the individuals, we have a snatch ladder here for the teams. So kind of interesting that we get the weightlifting consistency across all the semifinals, but a very different test for teams than individuals. I'm sure we can talk some more about that and what that might look like. And then, you get a thruster legless rope climb pair, combo, which is classic, that kind of evolution of Fran's style thinking, and very, very common to see something like this in a semifinal or regional format as part of the qualifying process for the games. So seems, again, like probably with regards to the things Tommy's talking about, these tests both fit in fairly well.
Mm-hmm. And I would tend to agree with that. And we were kind of discussing offline a little bit before, and then just in past meetings. I think the lifting event being one of the ones that CrossFit programs is something that I would hope to continue to see, because I think in the context of like the bigger picture for programming, CrossFit being able to control at least what strength element, what heavy barbell element is ultimately going to be filtered for at the games, with hopefully understanding of what is going to be tested at the games. That avoids just a big hiccup, kind of like what we had last year. We had a lot of different events programming different strength elements. And so the filtering felt a little funny when, we got back to last year, and, some of the tests felt a little bit redundant, maybe just because some of it had been tested in other semifinals. So taking that big chess piece off the board, saying, hey, we'll get this knocked out of the way and we'll make sure that it filters accordingly for what we're going to see at the games. To me, logistics wise, and some events may want to program the strength event, I think it just makes more sense in terms of flow.
So when we look at all 4 of these workouts, we know that from semifinals, this is where people punch their ticket to the CrossFit Games. Do we think that these are good tests for semifinals and for people to potentially advance to the next stage?
Should I maybe take them like one by one or something, or individual and team separately?
Well, I think just a quick note. I think as a whole that's an interesting question, because I don't think you can. It sounds weird to make a judgment based off of that without knowing the full programming slate, right? Because I think, and this is something that Brian has reiterated in the past, I think when we talk about a quality test to filter for people, I think we have to take it in totality. So I think where that is applicable here, it comes back to the pliability issue and how well can these pieces fit into what we would consider a comprehensive test to filter people, and does that happen?
Okay, well, let's start with the individual tests then. Do we think that these are good tests for a semifinal? Brian, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's that conversation is like, we know there's going to be a lifting test, and the fact that there is a lifting test that's going to be similar across all the fields of play does allow for what Tommy talked about, so that when we show up, because last year at the games they had the snatch, and it was like, well, for half the athletes we just saw them snatch a couple months ago, and for half the athletes we didn't, and so it's kind of it is what it is for last year, but we won't have that problem this year. We can assume that CrossFit knows what kind of strength tests will be at the games, and so there's probably not going to be a comparable or a similar complex to this once we get to Madison, which is nice. And it's like it says, it is an element of programming that all of the events would include one way or the other, but this just kind of takes that out of their hands. So I think that's I can understand why CrossFit would want to do that. And then the other workout, the legless rope climb repeat from 2014, like I do think it's clever to have a repeat workout from so long ago. However, like personally, I don't think this is a great selection, because it's I don't really think it's that relevant of a test anymore to qualify people to the games as it was in 2014. And what I would have loved to see was an evolution of it. So even if it was just that the men did 2 legless rope climbs every round, because even if you look back at some of the scores from there, there were a lot of men around the world with really, really fast and similar times. So to just create a little bit more separation, I think adding a second rope climb might have been, or a weight vest or something like that just increased the level of difficulty 8 years later. But for the women, I actually think that repeating it is pretty, it's appropriate, because if you look at a lot of the semifinal, or I guess it was regional results from back then, there were like maybe 1 or 2 women in each region that had really, scores that are more similar of what we might see this time. But then there was often like minutes drop off to the rest of the field. So I think that for the men and the women, legless rope climb is one of those things that there's just a noticeable disparity. And I would have maybe liked to see an evolution of this test for the men and a repeat for the women.
I think that Brian touches on something where it certainly would have been interesting to see an evolution of this. I still think that it can, and I think the jury will be out until we see the results in some regard. I just think the focus of the workout shifts a little bit. Whereas I think in the past it was, the legless rope climbs really took the center stage, and for the most part, it was everyone hopped right up, were able to do it unbroken, and then regulated with the run in between. I think this is going to be a high execution value test for the men in particular. Like, you're going to have to run hard for every single round. You're going to have to run hard the entirety of the workout, and you're going to have to operate with those legless rope climbs at a high heart rate, very similar to some of the regional finales that we've seen, where it's not so much can you get the work done, it's how fast can you get the work down, like with your foot just literally stomped to the floor. And does that make you prone to make mistakes? The execution elements of legless rope climbs, and this comes down, I guess we'll have to read some of the details, like the pinch on the leg, like with your legs on the way down, or, how people get down from the rope. Certain things like that come to mind when you think about, like, it was the no rep heard around the world for me when Jeff Evans during the Atlanta region, I believe in 2016, maybe 2017, where like it came down. I mean, it was like a bang bang type play, but I think it was the right call. And ultimately those types of little errors could be the difference maker. And we don't get a ton of those high execution pieces all the time. Usually that's almost reserved exclusively for the lifting type events, like a snatch, where the slightest thing can make a big difference. But I also think that in general, this was a fun storytelling piece, because this was the Katrin Davidsdottir villain origin story workout for her. This is when she missed the games, and kind of was the jumping off point for her to like come back even bigger and better and go on this tear for 2 years that kind of caught everyone off guard. So from a storytelling perspective, there's some cool things. I think if we don't roll some sort of highlight of Elijah Muhammad when he was doing those back in the day, it would be absolutely criminal. So I think there's some pieces of it, and I'm genuinely curious to see how fast some of the men do. I think I'm right there with Brian on the women's side. I think this is going to be a really good separator test to show how far they've progressed, and it'll look similar to how some of the men's results looked 7 years ago, if that makes sense.
How do you guys feel about the team semifinals? Do you think that those are good tests?
I think the thruster rope climb is going to be, it's a little bit of an opportunity for athletes to show their prowess in either a thruster or a legless rope climb, because I don't think that you have to, I think you can split it up kind of however you want between the two women and then the two men. So if you happen to have someone that's really good at one of those things, but maybe not at the other, it's, you'll see a lot of different strategies team to team on this, which is always, I do like when there are workouts that allow for a little bit of nuance. And probably having one person do all the thrusters and one do all the legless rope climbs is not going to be the winning ingredient. So I don't think that's too much of a concern that there'll be an athlete that can't do something like that. But I think you will see people that split it up, not in an even format, which I kind of like.
I also think it's important to note that in both scenarios, you effectively have a couplet that's chosen. So we talk about pliability. We're not pulling too many pieces in terms of what programming elements are available off of the board. So you get some sort of classic CrossFit style couplet, thrusters, legless rope climbs, something we've seen at regionals before, obviously, that, provides a certain stimulus. And like Brian said, some opportunities to slice it multiple ways, but you're not doing a massive chipper where suddenly you've taken 8 movements off the board that the programmers, these individual respective, events can't use anymore. The other element too, like going at the lifting event, I like, if we're going to have a lifting event, making sure that they don't come down to a single point of failure, if that makes sense. So for the individuals having a complex, right, there's multiple elements within it that provide opportunities to have, the point of failure could be at any point along the way instead of just a single lift. I think it's better, that level of execution is better tested for the lifts at the games. And then for the team, having all of them be a collective, I think that allows for some wiggle room, both, if you have an athlete that's not as strong, or if you're strong across the board, really being able to amplify a selling point for your team. So I like that there's more nuance than just a one lift and you're done.
Yeah, I'll just add something about the snatch ladder there. I think our graphic might have been missing it, that there are 10 predetermined bars, but then there's an 11th lifting platform that will be on the floor, preloaded to 285 for the men and 185 for the women. But you don't have to snatch that weight. If you clear the first 10 bars, then when you get there, you have an opportunity to declare whatever weight you want to attempt to hit as your final lift. So that's where you can see some separation. So it's not just like everyone's going to snatch 275 and have a tie. You have a chance to, if you're very good on snatching and you want to go to 300, 305, whatever, women 200 plus, you can do that. I am a little curious to see how this one will play out logistically. It's a lot of stuff going on the floor at once, 11 lifting platforms with 2 athletes, either the 2 women or the 2 men for each team out there at the floor at the same time. So you can have upwards of 20 plus athletes on the floor at one time. There is a time constraint of 25 seconds for athlete 1 and then 25 seconds for athlete 2. I think if, for example, Tommy and I were going and I bow out at some point, then he just fills into his normal slot going forward. So I think that while the test is good, the logistical application of this for the competitions is something that they, hopefully CrossFit is working very closely with them to make sure that the plan is solid, that there's a contingency plan if something goes wrong. If an athlete, gets injured snatching, what do they do to make sure that if a team bows out altogether, that the other athletes don't run up on top of them? If two athletes do make it to the final bar on the same team and they want to snatch different weights, how does that work? So there's a little bit of questions in terms of execution, but assuming that CrossFit's on top of everything there and their communication to the events, then this does have an opportunity to be a cool test. But if they're not, then it could be a problem. And obviously, hopefully that doesn't happen.
And visually, it's cool to see, particularly within the ladder, if it's spaced out well, to see different athletes at different points. You're like, oh man, this team is far in the ladder. Like, just from a visual perspective, if I'm someone in the stands, I'm looking, oh, my team is, on this first bar. Like, I'm keeping an eye out. Where's this Mayhem team going at, and oh my gosh, they've got 3 people, or they got both their guys still this deep into the ladder. There's a certain, I don't know, something about it that I think has been very unique to CrossFit and how they apply strength and test it in certain ways. Like, ever since, the deadlift ladder in 2009 or the individual regional snatch ladder in 2012, like that element of lifting and being able to lift repeatedly is another layer of fitness, I think, that gets infused into what is a typical strength test in other sports.
We talk about these 2 tests and how they will play in the greater picture once we know what all the other tests are. But do any of these workouts that CrossFit has programmed provide any challenges for the semifinals when they have to now program the other workouts for their individual semifinal?
I mean, I think that what Tommy said is very relevant. Is they're not taking a lot off the table, so they are leaving a lot of things still available for those semifinals to program. And I think that kind of in looking at the 4 of them, the only one that I'm worried about from a logistical perspective is the snatch ladder for the teams. Outside of that, I think that it's pretty straightforward. Maybe the semifinal directors don't love the workouts, but that's not up to them to decide. And so outside of that, I would say that at least the other 3 are probably pretty friendly in terms of the execution, that they can execute it well in the space that they have, and leaves a lot of stuff open for them for the other however many number of workouts they either need to have or choose to have for their competition.
And with the non-lifting events too, like having an element of a repeat, there's already groundwork that's been laid for how this will flow, how this will look, what people can expect as far as timeframes and things like that. That even if it's not a huge factor, it's just something a little extra that you have in your back pocket if you're planning an event that you're accounting for time. We can literally go look on the leaderboard and see hey, the men were pretty close to ripping this one through and through. We know what we can kind of expect. And from a broadcast perspective, that's really helpful too, because, we know it's going to be fast. We know it's going to be quick. We know there's going to be, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat with one missed rope climber, one person pinching their legs too soon on the way down. So there is an element of just an added benefit of having done this before.
And what's your bottom line with these 2 workouts for the individuals, 2 workouts for the teams when it comes to the programming? Brian, we'll start with you.
I would say, the bottom line is, for the most part, I think, CrossFit kept it pretty simple, and that's probably the best, route that they could have gone in terms of having this be a part of the semifinal programming for the first year. And, hopefully they can use it as a baseline to evaluate or reevaluate how they want to be, involved in something similar next year.
Tommy, what's your bottom line?
I'll agree with Brian. They put one in the fairway. They took Brian's Shrike, slight bow left driver off of the tee box, for disc golf, and it's sitting there nice and close. Good line. Now they've set the table for all the other organizers to really bring it home and maybe hit a nice long putt.
Wow, what an
All right,
incredible
guys.
analogy.
That was amazing. Brian loves it because disc golf do you love disc golf more than CrossFit?
I think it's time to wrap it up.
On that note, we are getting ready for the semifinals. We are going to have so much coverage. It's going to be a great time. Brian is going to be at some of them. So is Tommy Marquez. So make sure you guys stay tuned to Morning Chalk Up. We'll have full coverage, and we'll see you guys next time.